You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. On the show today, we have a ton to discuss. The Mets were able to salvage a series split in Miami, winning the final game of that 4-game set. I'll talk about that one in the first segment. Then in the second and third segments, I want to go through a very interesting piece of reporting from Will Sammon of The Athletic, as he really detailed what he's hearing about the New York Mets heading to the trade deadline, how they're going to try to approach things, what they might do to add, who will be on the table to sell or not sell. So we're going to talk about all of that fun stuff in the final 2 segments of the show. Before we get to any of it, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at JustBaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. And speaking of Booking.com, I'm sitting here right now in a beautiful place that we got from Booking.com, as myself, my wife, my brother-in-law, my sister all went to Disneyland for the first time ever today. My sister and brother-in-law, I talked about this on the show last week. They had a wedding out here in the area. My wife and I flew out to meet them, and we all experienced the happiest place on earth for the first time. And it was happy for the first 7 hours. It was a great day, but man, long day. I woke up, I don't even remember when, went to the park at 8 in the morning, and we stayed until close at 12. So that's 16 hours in an amusement park. And here I am, because it's your team every day, giving you your latest in the New York Mets, because a lot happened today, and it was a really good game, which I unfortunately didn't get to watch, because for some reason, Major League Baseball, what's up with this? Why am I blacked out from watching a Mets versus Marlins game when I'm in California? I get it when I'm in South Florida and I have to go find Bally's and watch it there. But I'm in Cali and I can't watch Mets versus Marlins. That was strange. So instead I had to follow on game day, just watch it that way as I was waiting on lines for rides and such. And then I had to catch up on the highlights later. So a little bit of a frustrating experience for me. But I digress on me. Let's talk about the New York Mets here, because it was a really good game. And Jeff McNeil deserves a lot of credit for that. Jeff had an unbelievable series, okay? He hits a 2-run homer in the second inning. DJ Stewart drew a walk to start things off there, and pretty decent game for Stewart. 0 for 2, 2 walks. That's the DJ Stewart experience, but Jeff McNeil made one of them hold up for a run with a 2-run shot. Third home run of the series for Jeff, who's starting to look pretty good. And I think it was interesting how the Mets played this series as far as who started games, where they played. Jose Iglesias got all 4 starts, and I think that says something, okay, because he has earned the right to be a starter on this team, and I think we're starting to see that. He is an everyday player for the New York Mets right now, and Jeff McNeil was in there for all but one of the games, a lot of them in the outfield. Today he was at second, Iglesias was at third as Mark Vientos got a day off. You also saw DJ Stewart out there a couple times in this series, while Tyrone Taylor, if I'm not mistaken, he got, 1 start maybe? I have to check that, but regardless, he certainly was not featured the way he was at times when Marte went down. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. Now, getting back to this game here, the Mets get on the board early with that 2-run homer from Jeff McNeil. David Peterson gives up a run in the bottom of the second inning. Peterson, though, he did a pretty good job pitching himself out of jams. That run that he allowed, he had walked Xavier Edwards, got a couple of outs, then he gave up a double, and they got a third out on that double. As the relay came to third base and they got Vidal Brujan out. But still, solid work from Peterson throughout this start. The other run he gave up was a solo home run in the 5th inning. Went through 5 innings, pitched for Peterson, gave up 6 hits, walked 4, struck out 4. Didn't go deep into the game, only went through 5 at 88 pitches. But he pitched himself out of a couple of tough spots there. One in particular, you had in the 3rd inning, where Brian De La Cruz with 2 outs gets a hit, steals second, throwing error from Alvarez allows him to advance to third. Josh Bell draws a walk, so we got runners at first and third. Big spot. David Peterson gets the strikeout to get out of that inning. And then the Mets respond right after that to tack on 2 more runs in the top of the fourth. Jose Iglesias with a leadoff triple. And then Jeff McNeil makes that hold up as well. Sacrifice fly to drive in Iglesias. Harrison Bader followed it up with a base hit, and then he got himself out on the bases again, was caught stealing, which really came back to haunt the Mets because Francisco Lindor ends up homering just after that. Lindor, huge game. He homered again later on in the 9th inning. So a 2-home-run day for Lindor is now up to 19 home runs on the season and really just continues to be the Mets' best player, the engine that drives them. To see him have a 2-home-run day when the Mets really needed to win a game, that's just everything you'd expect from Lindor, the way he's played this year, and he does not disappoint. Now, what this game ends up coming down to, again, though, is the bullpen. So you go through it. The Mets, they get another run in the 5th inning. That one was just a gift run where, Chirinos walked 2, hit a batter with the bases loaded. Pete Alonso did get a hit that inning, but that was just bad pitching. Then you get to the point, though, where, all right, David Peterson's done after 5, so what do? What happens next? And the Mets' answer was Jose Butto. And Jose Butto was pretty solid. He did give up a solo home run himself, but he got you through 2 innings. Phil Maton, 1, 2, 3, 8th. Then, after Lindor's home run, Mets winning 6-3, we work ourselves all the way to the bottom of the 9th. And the other day, I gave Edwin Diaz a lot of credit because he got a save in Miami, and it looked effortless. In a game where the bullpen was anything but that, Edwin Diaz just shut the door. 1, 2, 3. No worries. Now he comes into this game, strikes out the first batter he sees, but then he gives up a base hit. Then he walks a batter. Then he gives up another hit. And again, I can't watch this game, so I'm just sitting here following every pitch on game day, losing my mind, wanting to pull my hair out. Like, what is going on, Edwin? Why can you not seal the deal here? It was very frustrating. He did give up a run on a ground out with the bases loaded, but then luckily he got a pop out and got out of the jam, picked up his 12th save of the season. The Mets win 6-4. Overall, frustrating series. I think you're just happy to get the heck out of there, and at least you didn't lose the series. Now you have 2 more on the road, but these in New York City, as the Mets are going to square off against the Yankees in the Bronx over the next few days here. We'll talk about that a little bit in the final segment today, but you look at where the Mets are through this series, they survived it. And so now we turn the page to the next one. But before we even talk about Mets-Yankees, I want to talk about some very interesting reporting in The Athletic by Will Sammon, really detailing where the Mets might be thinking at this deadline. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsor. This episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. So book today like I did for the trip that I'm on right now on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have now winded down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. All right, so Will Sammon of The Athletic wrote a really interesting article. It's titled, Mets Trade Deadline Outlook. Here's how industry sources expect that they'll play it. Now, a lot of the stuff that's discussed in this article we've been talking about on this show for some time, but this is actually sourced, what Will Sammon did. I don't pretend to be a reporter who has sources. I just tell you what makes sense to me, follow my own logic of common sense, and sometimes that guides me in the right direction. Sometimes it doesn't, but that's what you come to this show for, is my own take on what the Mets are going to do. And from Will Sammon here, it's interesting because it adds a little bit more context to what the Mets might do. So the first things first, the draw of the article, the way that you probably found it if you came across something on social media, was Pete Alonso, because Pete Alonso is going to be the biggest story until the deadline happens, and he's going to be a Met. So right now, that's what we all think is going to happen, and Will Sammon, with reporting, pretty much says that's going to happen. But the one thing that he says, the caveat, the Mets leadership group will consider all options. People familiar with the matter said that it would be unlikely for New York to deal Alonso, even in a scenario in which it stumbles a bit before the deadline. So, when it comes to Pete, and they say something similar on the starting rotation, unlikely, even with Kodai Senga coming back, the Mets are going to go to a six-man rotation. Talk about Jose Budo has become invaluable to the bullpen. Yes, you could slide him into the rotation, but you need him in that bullpen. And if the move at the deadline, for one, is to make a trade to get bullpen help and then to trade a starting pitcher to do that so that you can slide Budo into the rotation just to get bullpen help when Budo is already in your bullpen, it doesn't add up. So we've talked about that on this show previously. So nothing that's really surprising there, honestly. But the one note is that the Mets are going to listen, which isn't some type of jaw-dropping revelation. You know, David Stearns isn't going to get a phone call from the, let's see, who needs pitching. Let's say the Astros call him up and say, hey, we're really interested in Jose Quintana. Can we work on a deal? David Stearns is going to say, no, screw you, and hang up the phone because Jose Quintana can't possibly get dealt. He's going to listen. He's going to entertain offers. But if a team is paying a proper price for a rental starting pitcher in Quintana that's very hit or miss, the Mets are going to take that deal when they're in the race. So I think, again, a lot of this stuff is pretty much what we've been talking about, but there's a few nuggets in here that really did pique my interest. The first, just talking about the bullpen. So they say it'd be very surprising if the Mets traded top prospects for a rental reliever. Big caveat there, rental reliever. Another one, a little bit further down, when it's just talking about overall what they're looking at, the last section of this article, and Will Sammon split it up into different sections. So Pete Alonso is a section, the rotations a section, the bullpen's a section. The final one is players with club control. Some of the biggest names, this is read directly from The Athletic, some of the biggest names generating buzz this deadline include players under club control, such as outfielder Luis Robert Jr. and pitcher Garrett Crochet from the White Sox, outfielder second baseman Jazz Chisholm of the Marlins. Could the Mets get involved? And then he says that other clubs may have better packages to offer because the Mets farm system hasn't had the best year when it comes to health in particular, but production. And you don't really know if they could swing that level of a deal. But he also closes the article saying, given Stearns' creativity in the past with trading for players under club control, and he talks about Christian Yelich as the most well-known example, nothing should be ruled out. So, yes, there's still a world where the Mets trade something significant and they make some type of a blockbuster trade, but they're going to have to get control. They're not going to trade for rentals, and they shouldn't. So I like hearing that. When it comes to how they're going to probably address this team, it goes back to Steve Cohen's money, because one of the big parts of this reporting from Will Sammon is the Mets still have an eye on their future. So the last thing that the Mets are going to want to do at this deadline is trade a top prospect who would come with a ton of control for a rental. And I know that there's going to be some commenters on YouTube today, and I do welcome all those comments, where people are going to say, what are the Mets doing? Why would they possibly, consider not going all in on this team? What's wrong with them to not take this opportunity to go out and get a big-time star to add into the fold? But it's not necessarily realistic when you really think about where they're at and where they want to go. So, yes, you want to win this year, but you don't want to win at all costs. And instead, if you're Steve Cohen, you are going to tell David Stearns to use your money as much as possible to make creative trades. And I think Steve Cohen at this stage can do that, can say, put some stuff in front of me and let's talk about our options here. And they're not going to do anything unilaterally without talking to Steve, although he does let his baseball people run the show. To me, it just is one of those situations where you are not in a position to trade prospects for this team. And instead, just like the Phil Maton trade, which was noted in this article, you have the ability to go out and get a deal done potentially for some reinforcements by really focusing on absorbing cash in the deal, using cash to your advantage. It's the thing that the Mets can always fall back on with Steve Cohen. So I want to talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. Get on the action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money at Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime the news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, using Steve Cohen's money is nothing new for the Mets at the deadline. Last year, they did it as sellers. And if they were to sell this year, that would probably be part of the equation. They're not going to, but if they did, that's always going to be a card that the Mets can pull, and they should pull, because other teams are cheap, and you can be their bank, and the bank always wins. So you can be creative with absorbing bad contracts to lessen prospect returns, to getting a player that you want that has more control that they might not want to deal, but man, this contract is an albatross. Clear that for them, and then they'll be grateful and return the favor. So it makes sense that this is the road the Mets are potentially going to go down, because that's what they did with Phil Maton. And I think, especially in the market that they're shipping, the market that they're buying in, that they're shipping, they're just going to send some stuff out. Now, the market that they're buying in, rental relievers potentially, or just relief pitching, you don't have to give up the farm to get those guys. So part of the equation that helps the Mets is the fact that what they need is the easiest thing to buy at the deadline. Now, finding the right trade, the guys that are going to come in, fit in your clubhouse, actually produce, that's a whole different story. But being able to make moves without having to give up your absolute upper echelon prospects, I think the Mets can do that for sure. And if they are going to give up the upper echelon guys, it does have to be for some type of a player that has control, whether that's making a big splash on Luis Robert, which none of us expect, but you never know, to plug in a center field. Okay, then maybe you're going to have to give us some top prospects, or you will have to give us some top prospects. But honestly, I think they're in a position where they feel pretty good just letting the market come to them, finding a couple of relievers where it's an opportunistic move to use your money to your advantage and get a guy to come in that can help you without having to give up a top 10 prospect in this system potentially. So which teams need the Mets to be their bank is where we're closing here. And I was looking for teams that were pushing up against the luxury tax. And there was a couple that came up. The first one is the Rangers, who are $14.5 basically $1 million over the luxury tax. Now, to get under that, if they decide to be sellers, they can trade Max Scherzer, they could trade Nathan Eovaldi, and they could probably get under it just clearing those two salaries. But in general, the Rangers are a team that is trending more towards selling than buying based on how they played this year. And if you can swing a deal with them, money might be something that would be beneficial for them to get off of their books. And there was really one name that jumped out. That's David Robertson, who is making a combined 1 year guarantee of $11.5 million. When you look at all of the intricacies of this deal, which included a $5 million signing bonus, $5 million deferred, a $1.5 million option on a $7 million mutual option. So super strange contract for Robertson, but just keep it in the back of your mind as a name that's getting paid a lot, that there's probably not a ton of teams that'd be willing to make that deal and then potentially have to have deferred money on their books for years to come. Granted, $1 million a year, nothing too insane, but it's just one of those things to think about, right? I don't think we often realize how cheap these teams truly can be and how much money does move the needle. So it's important to talk about these things. The next team that I saw that was just over the luxury tax was the Blue Jays. They're $8.4 million over, somewhere around there. Now, if they sell and they trade Chris Bassett and Kevin Gausman, they're going to be fine. They also have some other contracts in the books that they'd probably love to get off, whether that is George Springer, Kevin Kiermaier, Justin Turner. Don't see the Mets in on any of those guys. The name that does pop out is the same one we talked about on the show last week, which is Chad Green. Chad Green has a lot of experience in New York. He has pitched very well this year. It makes a lot of sense for the Mets to pursue him. At the same time, he's getting paid $10.5 million a season. And not a lot of teams will sign up to pay that unless he's going to close for them. And while you can make the case that he can't close, I think he's probably better not in that role. So we'll see if the Blue Jays are selling. And if they do, maybe the Mets can swoop in and get Chad Green. I do want to note that I've been talking about Chad Green on this show for some time now. And funny enough, that was one of the names mentioned in this article when I was talking about being able to absorb that money like they did with Phil Maton. A couple other names that jumped out for the Cubs. You have Drew Smyly and Hector Neris. Neris has been about average this year for the Cubs. He's pitching to a mid-3s ERA, which is not bad. But he's making a good amount of money, $9 million. There's an option next year. If he hits a certain amount of innings pitched or games finished, that would trigger and allow him to make $9 million again. So I think getting that contract off of their books in Chicago is probably a good thing. Maybe that's a name that's available. Another one, as I mentioned, Drew Smyly. He's been very good this year, pitching in a relief role, but he's still getting paid starter money. So he has a 2.79 ERA as a reliever this season in 30 and 2/3 innings pitched, but he's making $10.5 million. There's a mutual option for a $10 million deal next year with a $2.5 million buyout. So that right there is a contract in Drew Smyly where you call him up and say, hey, we'd love to insert him into our bullpen, and we'll pay everything. You might just get Drew Smyly. Very similar to what I talked about the Tigers, right? If you were to absorb from the Detroit Mark Canha's contract, maybe even Andrew Chafin's, maybe you can get a Jason Foley for a lot less when it comes to the prospect return. But that one you are trading for a guy that has control, and the Mets would probably have to give up more. So this could instead be a deadline where you just see David Stearns plucking talent here, plucking talent there, finding the guy on waivers. Oh, we'll pick him up, and he might be good. That could be the move here, and that's what we've talked about a bit lately, that maybe the Mets aren't going to be aggressive buyers or sellers. They might just sort of stand pat. And if you had to ask me, it's one of the three things. That's probably the one I lean on. Now, things can change, right? They could end up with a package where they're getting a relief pitcher that has multiple years of control, and then that allows them to actually decide to push the chips forward. But barring that, barring some other blockbuster that I'm not seeing, I think what's going to happen here is pretty clear. The Mets are going to add a couple of arms to their bullpen, likely guys that are making too much money based on their production this year, or other situations where maybe you decide, you know what, we'll pay the final couple months of Patrick Corbin's contract and we'll just release him. But now give us whatever reliever it is for doing you the favor. Those are the things that the Mets are going to try to take advantage of, and if they do, it might turn into a very good period. Honestly, it might turn into a very good deadline where the Mets accomplish exactly what they set out to, but they don't have to give up the farm. So when you sort of get yourself prepared mentally for what's going to happen at this trade deadline, understand that the big trades are unlikely. The Mets trading for someone that's going to be starting and in the lineup every single day for the rest of the season, the Yoenis Cespedes trade, if you were, that one's not happening. But it does not mean that the Mets can't get significantly better, continuing to invest in this team financially and holding on to the prospects so that you don't have to invest this way in the future. I mean, that's the whole reason why the Mets are averse to trading prospects, because they don't want to be in the position that they've been the last couple of years where they are trying to reload or get ready for a big push. And to do that, to actually get those enforcements in, you probably have to trade prospects that the Mets just don't want to give up. So this is going to be a deadline where we're going to see what David Stearns can do, how creative he can be with his newfound resources. And I really do believe that when it's all said and done, we're going to be happy with exactly how this whole thing ended up shaking out at the deadline. But until then, there's going to be nothing but speculation on any and all the guys who have been rumored to be attractive, at least where teams might be calling on them. We'll see. For now, though, I think you look at the road ahead for the Mets. It's just about continuing to win and put pressure on the front office that this is a team that is very good. It just has a bad bullpen. So if you can do that over the next couple series here, you got 2 against the Yankees. Luis Gil and Garrett Cole are pitching on their side. Jose Quintana and Sean Manaea for the Mets. You never know what can happen. It's going to be a lot of fun to see exactly how the Mets can respond after such a rough series in Miami. But I think this team has what it takes, and hopefully it is a good week of Mets baseball ahead as we are inching closer and closer to that deadline. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's show. I appreciate all of you who tuned in. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get up to 10,000 subs by the end of the year, so appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. And after your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You can find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.